Going to call to order the meeting of the Subcommittee on Municipal Marijuana. Joining us on that committee sitting tonight is Councilor Gould, Councilor Ann Manning Martin, Councilor Rosignol, Councilor Melville, and I'm going to ask, Councilor Gravel is not here. I'm going to ask Councilor Turco if he'll sit in for Councilor Gravel. Councilor Turco sitting for Councilor Gravel, who's not here tonight. And also joining us is Councilor O'Neill, City Council President Charest, Councilor McGinn, Councilman Sewis, so everybody here except for Councilor Gravel. So the purpose of tonight's meeting primarily is to talk to the two parties who will be coming before us in a couple weeks for special permit for the medical marijuana facility, and specifically the host agreement. This is something new to myself and to, I think, everyone in the room. I've done a little bit of research. I know some of you also have. We have City Solicitor Smazinski here to answer any questions that might come up regarding procedurally or legally. If we have any questions in that regard. Did you want to make an opening statement at all?
You know, maybe that's a good thing to do.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, there are a couple of things that I would like to emphasize right at the outset. When the legislation was passed last July, it had very, very specific language addressing the relationship between, medical marijuana dispensaries and municipalities. And, a lot of people attach themselves to the word revenue and may get the impression that somehow there's a windfall to the municipality associated with the legislation. What the legislation talks of is extracting no more than 3% of the operation's gross income, but in a very, very limited way. And that way is conditioned and restricted to actual impact costs that the community experiences during a particular 12-month period. Oh, okay. Tom, no one has ever complained that I'm too soft in the voice or too low. And just to repeat, the amount of money that can be extracted is essentially an impact fee. It's literally the costs that are experienced by the municipality. I mean, a simple example is what we went through at Salem Country Club. We had, to deploy many resources that cost the city in overtime, etc., that were realized by us that we asked for reimbursement. This is analogous to it, but it's actually more onerous because we cannot ask of the dispensary, ultimately the one or two that are approved by special permit, for any drawdown of that money up to that limit unless we prove and document that we've actually chalked up actual expenses, and those expenses are related to their participation or the fact that they've joined our community, and the documentation validating our request for a drawdown has to be a public record that's open for all to see. And I guess that's the main point, just to appreciate really what the environment is. Now, I'm not blind to what everyone else is saying. There are references to donations, contributions. That's gratuitous. That's not part of the statute. Some in my field, the Mass Municipal Lawyers Association, think that's unenforceable. And I just want you to always keep in mind, what is it that we can legitimately and legally acquire, and what is not in that category. Now, I'm not trying to cast any dispersions. You know, I know there's been discussions and there's references in both agreements that we have tonight. You know, I assume the good in people, that this is just a sincere extension of an olive branch in hopes of creating a nice relationship between the community and a new business. And I warn you that, you know, obviously I think over the horizon as to the what if. You know, what if 4 years from now someone says, you know, we don't have to pay that. Where are we? And I'm just going to tell you there's jeopardy to enforcing it. The other thing is this, and again, it's the approach that experience of almost a decade now in this position, you know, has fostered. I will tell you it's a mistake to use the gratuitous donation, charitable contribution components of either one of these applicants, you know, in your determination to grant or not grant or grant with conditions a special permit. It really can't be part of the equation. And it goes back to my second point that, you know, there's a real question as to whether it's enforceable or not. If I would have to say yes or no right now, I would tell you it's not enforceable, notwithstanding, you know, the goodwill that's intended. I will tell you, and again, you know, sometimes the best things happen that aren't scripted. You know, the opportunity to open is granted by the chairman. I do want to emphasize, you know, what the mayor said and what Ed Charis asked of every applicant in terms of agreeing, even in the host agreement, to no recreational marijuana, no matter what rights may inure to their, you know, a dispensary's benefit down the road. And I just caution you to take a look in the agreements as to whether it's there or not. I know the letter that was drafted by the mayor specifically said, you know, he certainly would like to see that in the drafts. So I guess the last point, and it may be a little bit of a repeat, is the conundrum that's associated with, you know, documenting actual expenses. You know, when you know you may have an impact, but you don't know what the number is right now, you know, what process do you want to use in the host agreement so that it's equitable for both parties to arrive at that drawdown number? And, you know, one thought is, you know, we would be hard pressed now to ask department heads to put, you know, to say, you know, what's your best estimate? They haven't even heard the presentations, you know, on the special permit, on the details of how each operation may be conducted, both individually or symbiotically, you know, in the occurrence that both special permits are allowed, and we have 2 there. And that's a calculus that's going to be hard to get in advance of doing a host agreement, but it may be information that you people may think is important, and I raise it because you may have the thought of saying, you know what, let's have the department's head here, you know, during the special permit presentations. Let's then send them off and try to come back with some sort of estimate of what the impact may be to the city as seen through the eyes of their department. So anyhow, I don't want to overstay my welcome. Thank you. Those are some of the thoughts that just popped to my head.
Council Gould?
Chairman, thank you. I don't want to drag this out because there's a lot of work to do, but I'm curious, Mr. Smazinski, is what's an example of a drawdown fee that we would use to
the simplest example, and it wouldn't apply here, you know, because it's a state highway, but, you know, say a business went in and we had to put a traffic light. That would be the simplest example.
Police details during construction and things like that?
That would be something assumed by the contractor and/or the business owner anyhow. But I guess thinking back, remember when Sonic opened up and it was bumper to bumper, I think, to Revere. And we had to deploy all kinds of police, at least for that first couple of weeks.
Thank you, Mr. Solicitor. Thank you, Counselor.
Councilor Melville?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When reviewing what you referenced regarding the 3% and the itemized, essentially what it's going to cost, do you believe that the city has some standing on what we've already spent on reviewing the police involvement on reviewing the applications, on what they need to do, the time our city solicitors have spent in reviewing this? Wouldn't that need to be attributed to an initial repayment of that time? Would we have standing with regards to what this particular statute is going towards?
Councilor Melville, number one, it's not tested. It's uncharted territory. But if you analyze, the prior history of any type of special permit applications, variance applications, Conservation Commission, that's really not in the ballpark. The mechanism that has been used is committees, including the City Council, can sometimes ask that a particular specialized analysis is done and by an expert of the city's choosing, but at the cost of the applicant. Now, it happens more planning board, Conservation Commission, not really here, but I don't see any of my time being, reimbursed up to this point in time. And again, it's untested, so I think that would be going out on a limb, on a reach.
Okay, so essentially, you're saying that that's if it was challenged by the two entities that are seeking the special permit. If they were to say, no, we don't want to pay that upfront fee, we want to move forward with litigation, then you're saying that would be a problem in that case.
I couldn't ascribe to you a percentage likelihood of success one way or the other. If I were to put my thumb on the scale, it would be on the end that would say we wouldn't be successful. And that's because of the prior history of our relationship with any type of applicant that comes down the pike for municipal permitting.
Okay. Just to follow, and I have other things I'd like to talk about on this outside of the financial, but there are examples in other cities and towns, host agreements that I've reviewed, speaking to other colleagues within the Mass Municipal Association and whatnot, that I think all of marijuana law within Massachusetts is uncharted territory at this point. So I think a very wide range of the options in front of us could be challenged and essentially could set precedent. So I think, from my perspective, as we move forward discussing these agreements, we just have to keep that in the back of our mind, and I definitely will as we move forward, because I think there's all sorts of issues that we're going to fall into that are post-initial go-live for most of these entities. Thank you.
Councilor Manning Martin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the city solicitor, I see, unless I missed it, I do see in one agreement that they clearly indicate that they understand and agree to not sell recreational, and then their host agreement references just medicinal. But I don't see it in the other one, and someone pointed out to me if I missed it. I don't see it in the other one. So it's in one and not the other. But here's my question to you, Mrs. Swazinski, is you've been very clear in both your words and your body language that you want us to be very careful. You're warning us and indicating certain things would be a mistake. So, and those things aren't enforceable in your opinion. So I guess what I'm asking is, how enforceable is the clause that they understand that they will not be selling recreational if and when recreational becomes legal? how enforceable is it that we would be able to hold them to that if recreational 3 to 4 years from now becomes legal?
I'm going to answer that two ways. One, it's a contract right that's subject to enforcement by way of an injunction in court. And what I would recommend, and I'm sure I'll be given an opportunity to address the issue, is putting it as a condition of the special permit too, so that you have a dual layer of protection.
So in other words, it is enforceable
I believe so.
if we were to follow that recommendation through
My
the special
opinion,
permit process?
I would say both, in the host agreement and in the special permit.
Thank you very much.
Councilor Melville.
Thank you, Council. Thank you, Chairman. So I actually had a couple of other issues on top of the financial. We can discuss on how we want to close that out, but I'm assuming tonight is not the final discussion on these host agreements.
So it was, I think, the expectation that we would come to an agreement on the host agreement because they were supposed to have special permit hearings tonight. Both parties put them off until the 28th. So it was my expectation that we would come up with an agreement on the host agreement. Both parties are here. So in the interest of transparency, I think any questions that we do have, I was hoping we were going to put on the table. Example is the one that Councilor Manning Martin just put on the table to bring both parties up and ask them. And then I also looked at 3 host agreements today. I had some thoughts, and I'm letting that play out. But that is, I think, everyone's expectation is to try and to come to some type of closure to move this so to have the special permit hearing on the 28th. And with the assistance of the city solicitor, the agreements that are made verbally here tonight, then they could put in contract language and host agreement language, and then he would then obviously vet them, approve them, everything that was said verbally that was agreed to, put in writing, and then when the special permit hearing would come back, the city solicitor would say, what you folks asked for, and they agreed to, they meet those expectations. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to be able to put that all in verbiage.
I appreciate that. So I really do stick to the fact that that there should be an initial, because of what it's going to cost us to set a lot of this up, that the city should be compensated in some way on that initial entry. I don't have a particular number offhand that I could say here. That's one reason why I said I'm not sure if we're prepared to do that. But I do think that there is a set compensation prior to implementation that the city could recoup in what it has expended, whether it be the health department, the legal department, our police department, in time and resources to prepare the city for this issue. And I think that it would be appropriate. I don't know if I'm in a position to be able to say that number. I am concerned about the specific impact fee language that's put into the statute that it's basically it has to reconcile whatever is paid to the city to the services that the city essentially provided. So with regards to that, that's my thoughts on that. I have a hard time looking at this and saying that the city of Peabody isn't in a position to recoup some of those funds initially, and then move forward with the 3% of gross sales. Because I think that, to me, is based on what we've been told about what the gross sales could be significant. Thank you.
So let me share a little bit of some of the research I did, and I know it's somewhat of an uncomfortable situation because you want to perceive when you're asking for something that it's appropriate and it's reasonable. I think that when you look at the 2 agreements, and when I listen to the city solicitor, I think one of the avenues that we can take is that in one agreement, item line 2 talks about a donation. So if someone wants to make a donation and become a part of the city, become a part of the city, goodwill, be a good partner, even in discussions that I've had with the mayors, we are looking for both of these entities to become part of the city and be a good neighbor. So one has a term donation in line item 2 with a couple of specifics. The other agreement has number 6, community support. So to me, it's just, half dozen one, half dozen the other. It looks like they both want to step up, be a good partner, and support the community. So now the question becomes well, how do we come up with a number that we're comfortable with? And what I did is, I looked at 3 agreements. The first agreement I looked at was between, and these are all for municipal marijuana agreements. The first one was in March of this year between Somerset and an entity. And keep in mind, the 3% gross sales, that's part of the, is it fair to say that's part of the statute that we automatically are entitled to that? Is that a fair statement?
If we can prove the expense.
Okay. So I guess when you say we can prove the expense, I just see that everyone agrees to it. I don't quite understand who would do that or how that would be done, quite frankly. If you have any suggestions, I'm open to that, but it seems like everything I've read, the 3% it's a part of the process. It's a given. And I think both companies have agreed to pay it, so I think we should probably assume that wouldn't be challenged. But the agreement with Somerset was basically a $10,000 community support and to community support the organization. I believe Somerset's a town, not a city. A charitable contribution of $10,000. In December of 2017, Town of Salisbury, host community agreement. That hosted community agreement was a payment of $25,000. And just recently, last month, May 9th, May 8th, I believe, the Town of Lakefield, the selectmen negotiated a host agreement with the medical marijuana applicants, and they agreed to, and this is in the newspaper article that sums up what happened, to donate, in quotes, a $50,000 mitigation check to the town to cover administrative, legal, public safety expenses related to licensing the facilities. So I can only, go on what I see that's been done by other towns and communities to try and come up with some type of a figure that I think everyone's comfortable with. I think we all agree that there are going to be certain stresses that are going to be put on, some that we don't know right off the bat, but I know that, if these companies agree to the terminology of donation or community support, do you think in that regard, Council, that we are then in pretty good legal ground? We're just stating that they're coming to the table and making that that donation, so to speak, that statement.
Ready?
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, if I may, could we shut the fans off? Tim, we're having a hard time hearing over here.
Ian, do you want me to wait?
Yep, if you could.
Yep.
Maybe a 2-minute recess, Mr. Chairman? I don't know how long
Tim
it's...
can move faster than that. Huh? I'm usually there, here.
Take a quick 2 minutes, Council. We're back in session. Councilor Smazinski has the floor.
You know, the chairman cited 3 examples where there were voluntary payments incorporated into a host agreement. And this is where I have to return to the point of beginning. I'll bet anything that any one of those 3 municipalities didn't have 2 people competing for special permits and properties abutting each other. If this type of discussion occurs and there's jeopardy as to whether neither one, the other, or both get a special permit, it's certainly going to be incorporated in the disappointed party's argument in court. That's the difference. We have a little different situation. Now, I'm not going to halt any type of open-air discussion about this with the applicants when the chairman invites them to the microphone. I just have that warning because we have a little different scenario. And we experienced it. We had it when 2 abutting landowners, literally within a couple hundred yards, applied for digital billboards. So that litigation, which was 5 separate cases, 2 of which went to the appeals court, preceded a number of the councilors now. But, you know, we lived through that type of conflict, legal conflict. So again, I'm just warning you that this is a little tricky.
Councilor McGinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not on the committee, so thanks for allowing the comments through you to the city solicitor. Given your guidance there a moment ago, is there anything in the statute that requires the municipality to work from the draft put forward by the applicant, or I guess by the party that wants to proceed with medicinal marijuana, or conversely to neutralize it? Does the opportunity exist for the municipality to put forward a boilerplate document that we think is reasonable on behalf of the city, so that they're both dealing with precisely the same agreement, and there is no issue of potential down the line of unfairness, I guess, is the scenario you were describing?
You're exactly correct. We could have taken the first step and said, here's what we want as a host agreement. We're essentially unwilling to change it unless you can point out some illegality, and put it in the laps of each of the applicants and say, take it or leave it. The administration's view was to let each applicant put her best foot forward with an agreement and let us evaluate it after it came in. But you're right, it could have been the other way around.
It could have been, but you're basically saying we've already established a policy where we're requesting them to put forward the document.
To cut to the chase, this committee could say, you know what, Mike? Go to work, do your homework, recommend to us a 3rd document, and we'll review it to see whether or not we want to basically send it back to them and as your draft. You could do that.
Mr. Chairman, I mean, to me, that approach makes a great deal of sense, given the kind of the inputs that we've had from the city solicitor thus far. When I look at these agreements, they're vastly different. I mean, one of them is saying straight up 3%, understanding that we've got an obligation down the line to substantiate, document, what actual costs were incurred. But the other one is kind of got this algorithm that comes into play based on weight, or it's a whole dollar figure with a blank line, and we have no idea as we sit here tonight what to plug into that blank line, because we don't have any estimates from any of the departments as to what we anticipate the cost would be. we're asking them to project that forward, I guess, 5 years, because I believe these things can only endure for 5 years. So I'm not sure how we could actually proceed on item 8N, in a timely fashion. I don't see how we could. I mean, we don't have any of, unless they have that information here tonight, revenue projections or weight projections that they would have that would allow us to calculate what this might be, and then we would have to somehow estimate that against what we think the actual cost to the municipality would be. That's an awful lot to expect, that we're going to come to a conclusion on any and all of that tonight. I'd defer to other councilors for comment.
Council Gould.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, have you met with the appointed, I know you haven't met with the subcommittee, but have you met with Ms. Cameron, Chief Griffin, as the mayor requests that they have input? Have you done any background to carve out what you would like to see as a host agreement?
So I did have communication with Sharon Cameron. I did not have any communication with the chief. I thought via the letter we received that he was going to be here tonight, but I had not spoken to the chief at all, but I have spoken to Sharon Cameron.
Is it your expectation that we vote tonight?
Well, since you asked me that, I have to agree with Councilman McGinn in his suggestion, and this is, I'm okay with changing course. I think it's a valid point. I wish that suggestion had maybe been made earlier, but I feel the same way I think he does. I think there's a lot of trepidation. We're all trying to do the right thing, but I think in reality, when I got these two agreements, I'm not a lawyer. I vetted them as best as I could, but I think what we should try and do tonight is, when we have the parties here, I don't think it's, if everyone on the subcommittee is comfortable, I think that there was some mention of donations in that agreement. I think that as I said, from the background that I've done, I think our job, and as uncomfortable as it might be for some of us, it is our job to put a number on it. That's what the other communities have all done. So if we can come to that, I think I'd like to maybe come with a template, a framework, and then Councilor Smozinski could then come back to us, and draft that document, and then we could all review it. And then, if we can't do it on the 28th, well, we have the 12th, and that's why I think it was important to have that meeting tonight. But I do think at some point, we have to try and move this ball forward, not just kick the can, but really have some type of concrete framework and what we want to do and time frame.
Through you to Mr. Swazinski, Mike, are we on okay legal footing for us to define the host agreement as opposed to them submitting? Is it?
It's precisely the answer that Councilman McGinn was looking for. Sure, you can do a third version.
Okay.
And call it, the city proposal.
So do you need information from any of the applicants prior to, or are you comfortable tonight going away with what each one is offering and then coming up with a template that will be?
I'm sorry for keeping this on at the same time. What I need from this committee is a consensus as to some of the major points that you want me to address. And I'm going to pull one issue out, to give you something to think about as an example of direction. Both agreements talk of the 3%, okay? And in one sense, there was the observation that one of the agreements isn't as detailed as to, how it's defined as the other agreement. Well, I can allay your fears because state statute talks about it, and it's certainly implied in the contract. But neither agreement gets into the real mechanics of how the accounting is going to work with this. one of the thoughts that came to mind is, okay, you're going to be open for business, and there's going to be a 12-month period. Should we be requiring them to set aside in an escrow a fund per month, 3% of their income, so it builds over time, so that we're assured there's a kitty at the end of the 12 months against which we can present our documentation and come to an agreement as to a disbursement. Okay? Now, again, it's not to say that, both applicants aren't honorable and aren't going to follow through, but if you want belts and suspenders, Tom Gould, you can stand on the desk and say, Mike, I kind of like that language. I'd like to see that in there. And that's just an example, okay? You asked as to whether there should be some, commentary by the applicants. I would answer that twofold. Number one, I certainly think it's appropriate to allow them to have the microphone and talk about anything and everything that's been discussed tonight. I mean, hey, they may disagree with some of the things that some of us and I said, and it's time, let's let them have the say. Let's let them have the say on this commentary of the Somerset and the Linfield, donations. I know Councilor Melville did his research, and there were a couple of, albeit smaller, communities, not as densely populated or developed as Peabody, and they did get upfront fees. And I can't tell whether that was just, again, like gratuitous or not, and whether it was subject to any conflict. But that's something that's worth asking these applicants to comment upon. But in the end, if you want a third document, the city's proposal, you're going to have to give me commentary on, the various components to the agreement that's in front of us, the two agreements that are in front of us. That's what I need. Okay? Sorry to be long-winded.
Council Rossignol and Council Charest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How long would the turnaround time be for you to come up with a third document if we chose to go in that direction?
Tom, 2 minutes after you tell me what to do, it's done.
Fair enough. The reason for that question is I know we have another meeting on Tuesday for the educational budget. I'm wondering if once we come up with what we're all thinking as far as what we want in a host agreement, if Attorney Smazinski could come up back with us on Tuesday, maybe we have another meeting before a proposal and before it goes to open session. But I also agree with Council Smazinski that I do think while the applicants are here and while they've heard all of our discussion, I think it would be apropos to listen to what they're thinking to help us formulate what we're thinking into a third document. Thank you.
Council Charest.
Thank you, Councilor Chairman. Even though I'm not on this committee, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak. One of the things that did jump right out at me when I was looking at it is that, as Councilor Manning pointed out, not both applicants talk about the agreement and pledge when I asked them when they were in front of us that they would not look to do recreational marijuana. I was certainly hope they would hold themselves to that pledge, and I do take it as a pledge. And I do like the conversation going back and forth. I kind of expected the councilors on this committee to have that dialogue about different things and what they're looking for. As the city solicitor said, and if I listen to him carefully and believe what he says, that when they make a pledge for a donation or in this application, is it can they be held to that? Over and above, they can always make donations. After agreement, on their own, they want to be a good partner in Peabody, like any other business do. They contribute to other stuff in the city that goes on. If it's scholarships or if it's parades or whatever it is, they can over and above do what they that 3%. So I would hold them at that part. So again, that's my only thing is that they do recognize the pledge and that you do have the conversations back and forth, because there's a lot of, I think, thought that needs to be put into it, as Council was talking about, and City Solicitor, about an escrow account. I would assume, especially for the first year, you're not going to know what that 3% is. You're not going to know what the cost burden on the city is until we achieve that. So if you set a certain amount and it's in an escrow, if you exceed that, that money could go back, but you always have it. And I'm afraid that if you don't, the first year, if you don't have a solid number and you're under that, can you ask them to contribute more? So I like the dialogue. Thank you, Councilor.
So if no one has any objections, I think at this point it'd be a good time to ask the applicants to come up with their representation to speak. So I'm going to ask Councilor Kelty if he'd like to come up and address the subcommittee, and he represents HR Development.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm happy to be here this evening representing HR Development and Wellness Connection of Massachusetts. We are the nonprofit entity that will operate the actual dispensary is Wellness Connection of Massachusetts. HR Development is the party that has the purchase and sale agreement and will be the builder developer and will pay taxes, real estate taxes to the city of Peabody for the building they intend to construct. Now, we have provided you with a host agreement, which is something that we've used in other communities, and it recognizes the most recent amendments to the statute inasmuch as we have pledged the 3%, and we have recognized the fact that the city is entitled to impact fees. Those impact fees must be determined by the city. They must be justified by the city, presented to us, and we will pay them. The statute provides for an audit in which the state can come out and look at what these fees are, how well they are connected, what the nexus between this several $1,000s that you've asked us to pay and the actual operation is. We're certain that there will be impacts. We are quite certain that we can work with the city to help analyze those impacts and try to maximize the amount of money that can be realized under the statute by the city. We have in our, both in our host agreement and in our cover letter, we have indicated our willingness to be a strong community member, and we will recognize charities, but we think that a pledge of a certain amount to a certain charity in advance of even being a selected operator is premature, and I think, as the solicitor has stated, that it is unenforceable, but we would be happy to meet. We are fully intending upon having a community relations officer who will be with our company, work with the community. We can identify on an annual basis charities that are seemingly more deserving. I know that people make application for charitable donations. People make application for scholarships. If it's a scholarship general, there would be applications. 1 year, perhaps it would be charitable donations to one particular entity, and perhaps the community would realize or sense with us that there might be a more appropriate in a second year. There could be some sort of physical natural disaster that would mean that a section of town might create a charity that would need the money more than somebody else the previous year. So we're fully committed to these donations, but we feel as though it's premature to put that in a host agreement. If this committee decides that there would be a host agreement, which would be a third document that would be a take it or leave it, that's your preference. In the communities that we've operated in the past, it's unusual to see a host agreement agreed to before an operator is actually in the community. Frankly, from a contractual standpoint, if I don't have the right to operate here, how is it that I can sign on to a host agreement? I think the host agreement becomes something of a template that says after the fact, this is the kind of rules and regulations you'll abide by, and we're certainly pleased with that. We think that the special permit process can provide a condition that says subject to an acceptable host agreement being worked out after the fact. So with that, we're happy to answer any questions. I have several members of my team. We have Terry Fracassa, who is our regulatory compliance officer and attorney, former U.S. attorney, and we have Jack Santucci, who is an operational person. So if you'd like to hear from any of those folks with respect to this evening's questions, we're happy to present them and answer any questions that you may have.
Councilors? Okay, at this point, I'd like to invite Attorney Ankeles up. Councilor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Attorney Kelty, you mentioned that this document was used in other communities. Which other communities in Massachusetts?
Have we used it in Massachusetts? Rick, would you?
Okay. Just please state your name and address for the record. Thank you.
Richard Bennett, 30 Railroad Street, Revere, Mass, for Wellness Connection of Massachusetts. We haven't signed that form of host community agreement in Massachusetts. The Revere facility, which is now under construction, we've presented it to the city as a template. Our experience, quite frankly, is that, as Councilor Kelty said, that the applicant is first specially permitted for the use. Then the host community agreement is filled out in much more detail based upon a back and forth with the city and specific needs that the city might have. We think we can probably help justify really substantial impact fees, but they do has to be justified, as the city solicitor said, under the new statute, which places an onus on the city. So it's important that you do in order to maximize the revenue to the city, we think it's important to work with the city to fully flesh out what the potential impacts would be, and also the mechanics of what works both with the city accounting, the city budgeting, calendar and whatnot, in terms of the availability of funds, all of those things. But again, as a practical matter, what we've done and what we've seen not only in Massachusetts but elsewhere, because the same concept has been adopted pretty much universally, at least on the East Coast, is first the city will review the applicants, will look at this, the specific project that's proposed, all of the appropriate sort of mechanical conditions on the specially permitted use will be imposed by the city as conditions in the special permit. Then everybody knows exactly what's going to be there. One of the conditions of the permit would then be that the host community agreement be acceptable to the city. That's the way procedurally we've always done it, and that we've seen throughout the Commonwealth. Having said that, again, we have two provisional licenses. One is for Peabody, because the way that this city wanted to do it was to first receive the provisional license from the state, then come back to you folks. We received a provisional license in Revere already, and then we went after, we first obtained the local approval in Revere under their ordinance, then got the provisional license. So those are the only two, and we have not finalized it in this state. We've got Maine, Rhode Island. Happy to go through the whole marketing for wellness. But but again, what we tried to do was to put forth a template that gave the greatest amount of flexibility for maximizing revenue to the city of Peabody, with our expectation being that we'd be able to sit down with the city and work together to make sure that everything that is compliant with the new statute that the city can get, that we'll end up giving it to you.
Council O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not a member of this committee, but I just wanted to back up. I understand the comments about host community agreements. Could we just get some answers possibly on like projected gross sales, you know, for the first 12 months? And then I guess I'd like to know average individual sale that you're projecting, knowing that there possibly could be two facilities in the same area. I just want to get that kind of color, please. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jacques Santucci. I'm the co-founder of Wellness Connection of Maine, representing Wellness Connection of Massachusetts. So your question is about sales for this particular dispensary. So just like any business, the sales going to ramp up, and it all depends on production and availability of product. Also depends on how many patients going to be authorized to purchase, based on the number of doctors who are going to prescribe, because we're talking about medical marijuana here. I would think it's difficult to talk about the first month or the first year or the first few months, but I would say over the first year in Peabody, we can think about $4 to $5 million of sales ramping up.
And through you, Mr. Chairman, in terms of I'm sure you run the numbers, you're running the business, but in terms of each individual sale that you estimate, you know, each one customer comes in and the average sale they'll purchase?
Yep.
Approximately?
Yep. So the way we look at sales is either by tickets or by month, right? So it depends obviously on how much money people have to be able to buy their products. Usually a ticket is around $100. So again, it depends on the social profile of individuals. So we probably could say around $90 to $110. Also depends on the availability of product. And I would say usually people come 2 to 3 times a month. So as an average, you could think about $300. Again, it's going to depend on how many doctors are going to prescribe and what people are looking for, and the social demographic.
Thank you.
Council Kelty, I have a question. If this committee could provide you with a third document, a host agreement that would be produced by the city solicitor, and we gave it to you, and that host agreement would be contingent upon approval of a special permit by the city council, would you folks, and you'd have that in advance, would that be, could you see yourself agreeing to that agreement?
In other words, before we receive the special permit, we would be giving a template of a host agreement that would say that it was contingent upon getting the special permit?
Absolutely. I would never expect you to agree to the host agreement without getting the special permit.
Right.
I'm trying to, once again, move
Sure, that
this.
makes some sense to me, in as much as now we would be contractually bound to. Sure.
So procedurally, we could agree to the host agreement based upon the fact that you would then be granted a special permit. I think that's what I just said.
I think it's in reverse.
City solicitor is going to help out here.
Yeah, I think that's a reverse.
I think the question to be asked is, what would your position be on having a draft host agreement being made a condition of the approval of the special permit?
I think my 90% certain that as long as the city is operating within the parameters of the state statute, that we could easily agree to that, because there are very strict regulations. So yes.
Progress. Okay. And I think my fellow council, you can see what we're trying to do here is, I respect the fact that they'd like to negotiate the agreement after the special permit, but I think, quite frankly, I'd feel more comfortable if we had the agreement negotiated before the special permit, and I think moving it along. Anyone else have any further questions of Attorney Kelty? Being none, thank you. Attorney Ankleys, representing phytotherapy.
Thank you. I just want to start by thanking Councilor McGinn and Councilor Gould for the suggestion that they made. I think coming up with a template is an excellent idea. This is not a contest. We don't pretend to be better than anybody else. We're here as an applicant for a special permit. We believe that we're going to be able to satisfy all of the requirements of a special permit, and therefore we want to be able to enter into a host agreement that the city is comfortable with, that we're comfortable with. And I think that the statute, if you read it carefully, provides every applicant with a sufficient amount of protection in that the city is prohibited from attempting to do anything which is unreasonably going to interfere with the normal course of business of the applicant. And so therefore, we're very comfortable with signing or negotiating a template either before or after the hearing for a special permit. It makes no difference to us. We want the city to be comfortable. We want everybody to believe that they're being treated fairly. Again, as far as we're concerned, it's not a contest. We want to be able to do business in the city. Again, we want to be able to do business in Ward 5. When I put the host agreement together, the toughest part of what we were considering were, what do we offer the city? What is there we can do? We didn't know what the city wanted, but having a template, having some facts and figures, having some programs that are reasonable and fair and serves the city well, that's an easy answer. Not at all difficult. Not even open to negotiation. It's something that you're going to accept. And I think you're going to find that if we do business, and we do business well in the city of Peabody, that you're going to become part of the social, moral, and charitable fabric of the city. So that above and beyond what the city believes to be fair and reasonable in their template, whatever programs you feel as though you'd like us to support in connection with what is allowed by the statute, we're happy with that. And we're going to go ahead and above and beyond that become part of the moral and charitable fabric of this city. Hopefully we'll be successful, and hopefully we'll be able to make donations to those charities that mean something, not just to any counselor, but to us, to those people who operate the business. We don't have any problem with anything that you've suggested, and I welcome the template. I welcome a level playing field, and I welcome some direction from the city. When we started, I said, do we have a program that we can support? Community police, awareness, drugs, that sort of thing. We went to the police department. there was nothing there that we were able to pick up on. But again, if you can quantify that, present it to us, and it falls within what's allowed by the statute, we're extremely happy with that. And again, thank you for making the suggestion. We're all on board.
Floor is open, councilors. Thank you, Council. Oh, Council O'Neill.
Mr. Angeles, same question in terms of the 12-month sales for phytotherapy, estimated gross sales, and then average buy.
The number you received is pretty much what goes, throughout the Commonwealth. It's expected to be 3 to 4. We don't see any difference. It depends upon so many things: your location, your competition, how good your crew is, the product you present. But the 3 to 4 figure is a fair number.
That's why I find it curious. You said it exactly, the competition. There potentially could be a location that's offering similar products right next door. So that's why I just wanted to get a better feel for estimates.
And that's why you want to have a template that puts everything on a level playing field. Thank you.
Council Charis.
Thank you. And while you're here again, I'll throw the same motion out at you. The last time with your client is that, do you pledge that you would not entertain into the recreational marijuana?
Yes, we put that in our host agreement.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you, Councilor Angeles. Thank you. So at this point, before I ask for a motion regarding the template, I want to maybe seek the city solicitor's input and give you a little bit of commentary on. When I read these documents, there are certain things that I like about them. So I don't know if we go through them item by item, because, for instance, number one, I'm going to refer to phytotherapies. Number one, in my opinion, is basically a templated statement that they both have in there, whether phytotherapy has it or HR has it, or, what number they have it in their agreement. It just talks about the 3% of gross revenue received by the city. But there are certain things in here. It talks about using local contractors, hiring local employees 50%. So we can go through it, we have to move it along. We can go through it step by step if you like. I'd like this. I know he's looking for some direction. I think there are certain things we probably want to suggest. I assume there are other things that quite frankly, according to the statute, that are implicit and that you'd put in the template anyway. So that's my thinking. Anybody else have any thoughts on that? Councilor Melville.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I agree completely. I think that there is a number of templates out there from other communities. If you just Google medical marijuana host agreements, the number of them come up. I do think that there is an importance of redundancy compared to what the state statute has. Just in my experience as a regulator, there's the idea that the city and town is going to communicate directly with the state based on how large of an area the state is asked to cover. The state is going to have to cover the Cannabis Control Commission. I think we want to put in some self-reporting rules or some requests for self-reporting so that we can at least have that an agreement from the entity. And I would speak to character and fitness, maybe some language in there. I know there's some legal language that we could use that has been suggested in the past that would back that up. And I know a lot of this is in the statute right now at that was passed by the legislature and signed by the governor, but I think it's important to be redundant, as has been said over and over again in a number of different, between the applicants and from the city side. This is unprecedented in many ways, and most of it hasn't been tested legally. So the more that we include, I think the better we can be. So that would be my opinion on that. Thank you.
Councilor Smozinski, please.
To cut to the chase, what I'm going to suggest is that the committee give me authority to communicate with both attorneys. Also, it's maybe an involuntary volunteer, but also work with Councilor Melville, because I know he's done a tremendous amount of work. Not that others haven't done a lot of work, but he has a nice compilation of specimens from across the state, and his regulatory experience is valuable. And I would just ask for authority for he and I to work with the attorneys and then come up with a template and provide it to you, say, before the 21st of June. And that way you would have it by the 28th.
Any questions, discussion? Councilor Turco?
Thank you. So Attorney Smozinski, so if you did have that by the 21st, could we just include it with the regular special permit, or do we need to have a subcommittee on the 28th prior to? And I'm just wondering if we could just expedite this and move it to regular session, include the agreement that they come up with the special permits, and advertise. Tim, would the 21st give you adequate time to advertise for the 28th if we receive that document and put it in the packet?
Yes.
So could we just do that rather than have another subcommittee meeting to this regard, where we're about to possibly agree that Attorney Smozinski and Councilor Melville can work these agreements out anyway? I don't know if there's a necessity for another subcommittee meeting. It's just my opinion.
Councilor Rosing,
Thank you. On that thought, so if the template comes back to us on the 21st and there is language in there that one of the committee members don't necessarily approve of, what would be the way to convey those thoughts or those concerns? Would it be directed to you, Council? And would that be adequate and still be available so that we still have the public session on the 28th?
Council?
You have the meeting on the subcommittee meeting on the 28th, right?
Well, so Council's asked about the subcommittee on the 20th. Councilor Turco, my only concern was actually what he just said, was the fact that if the agreement comes, and let's just say for argument's sake, 85% of it, 90% of it looks good, but there is maybe a question of a council about a piece of it, is it appropriate to discuss that in the committee of the whole, or should we have a subcommittee with the expectation that, it would be relatively, everyone's had the document for a week ahead of time, it would be a relatively brief discussion, unless, if it's just out of control and we just don't agree with it all, then we can table it. But I think the expectation would be that we're going to get it on the 21st, everyone's going to have a week to look at it, and then if there's anything that comes up as a red herring for anybody, they could voice that to subcommittee, and, quick 15-minute subcommittee meeting. If we make any changes, it's a late communication, we accept that that host agreement. If there are no changes, then we're fine. But your thoughts on that, Councilor Turco, what you brought up?
No, Mr. Chairman, that works for me. I was looking to expedite the process and not have an additional meeting on the same subject.
My sentiments, but I just feel in the due process we have to do that. So before I close the public hearing, yep. Councilor Gould?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike, I don't know if that's I don't know if the language should be placed in the host agreement, but I'd like to see any police work, detail work, any kind of activity where we hire police, we try to do Peabody Police first. I know state may have jurisdiction, but it is private property off of Route 1, so I'd like to see us work in the Peabody Police Department for detail work, if I could, please. Thank you.
We'll address that.
Any other recommendation they would like to make? Councilor Turco?
Mr. Chairman, through you to Attorney Smozinski, I'm sure you're already aware of this, but I think that Sharon Cameron should have a huge say in some requirements of this host agreement due to the health issues, that may come up, and requirements from the health department for funding for specific projects related to marijuana or marijuana abuse. So I would appreciate it if she would be part of this discussion with you and and Councilor Melville.
First of all, I can tell you she's been incredibly proactive over a number of years on this issue, even well before the referendums came around the corner in successive Novembers. So no question about it. She does a great job with this stuff.
Chairman?
No.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to add, I agree with Councilor Melville in his initial remark saying that there's already been costs associated for the city, so I would like that incorporated into the hostage agreement as well. Thank you.
Council Gould.
Mr. Chairman, would Ms. Cameron like to add anything at this point? Please, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I have made some recommendations both to the mayor and to Councilor Sasslaw about different public health programs that could be considered as part of any host agreements or any fees that come to the city as a result of medical marijuana facilities. And most of the recommendations are in line with the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry issued a policy statement in 2017 that described the impacts of marijuana legalization and highlighted some concerns about some of these policy changes on adolescent health in particular. And they stated marijuana legalization, even if restricted to adults, can be associated with decreased adolescent perception of marijuana's harmful effects, increased marijuana use among parents and caretakers, and increased adolescent access to marijuana, all of which reliably predict increased rates of adolescent marijuana use and associated problems. So as a result of that, they have recommended initiatives to increase awareness of marijuana's harmful effects on adolescents, improved access to evidence-based treatment for adolescents, and careful monitoring of the effects of marijuana policy changes on child and adolescent mental health. So the priorities I would like to highlight are directly tied into those. First of all, the first priority would be funding for the Healthy Peabody Collaborative. That is a group that's charged with doing prevention work around substance use in the city. They work primarily with school-aged youth to prevent and delay substance use. They engage students at all levels in the city. There's 2.5 employees who work there. They're primarily funded through state and federal grants. The federal grant is expiring next year, and it's not renewable. That is their primary source of funding. It's $125,000 a year. Their goal is to prevent youth from starting to use substances. There's evidence that shows the longer you delay first use, the less the risk of impairment to brain development, and the less likely somebody is to develop a substance use disorder later in life. Social norms around use, including the perception of harm and parental disapproval, are proven factors that can delay use. The second priority would be funding for the Student Health Center at Peabody High School. The Student Health Center provides clinical, medical, and behavioral health services. They have 1 full-time medical provider and 2 full-time behavioral health providers. In the school year for 2016 and 17, they provided 1,037 medical visits and 1,524 behavioral health visits. That represents approximately 100 students. The director of the Student Health Center estimates that 80% of those students seeking behavioral health services admit to regular marijuana use, primarily as self-medication for conditions including anxiety, depression, and sleep disorders. They're primarily funded through federal grants, but also some local grants, Boston Children's Hospital and Leahy, the Leahy Foundation, but there's a funding gap there of about $84,000 a year. And then the third priority would be provide additional training and support for other school staff, including school nurses, guidance and adjustment counselors, and administrative staff, and it would be to provide them training around drug recognition to identify and assist students who are impaired in school. It would be to allow them to help identify other students in need of intervention, and it would be to provide training on brief interventions for students in need of support. So those would be the 3 public health recommendations that I would make regarding any host agreements.
Council Charis.
Thank you. You mentioned a couple times grants, federal grants. If we enter an agreement with the sale of medical marijuana being done in Peabody, would that make us ineligible for any federal grants coming in? Because has that ever been looked at, that if we have this medical marijuana, because it's state, not federal, do you see any language in any of the federal grants that says if you have sales in Peabody, you are not eligible to get these federal grants?
I haven't seen any language to that effect. The reason that we're ineligible is that specific source of funding is Drug-Free Communities grant money, and any municipality is only eligible for 10 years of funding, and so we're reaching the end of our 10 years and we're not eligible to reapply.
Thank you. So you don't anticipate that language to be out there? I know the feds are looking at it differently. I'm waiting for them to walk in and say, guess what? You're not doing it anymore. So I'm a little nervous about how many federal grants, and I am aware of how many there were, but you really become aware when you say to us how much there is in the gap. So I just want to make sure that if there was any language that was going to be used for us to lose those grants, that language is allowed to be applied to the agreement. Thank you.
And just as a point of information, Councilor, regarding the federal government, if you Google President Trump, and last Friday, actually he weighed in on that, and actually it's going in the other direction where it does look like the federal government is looking to reclassify marijuana, not to be a Class 1 drug anymore, but to and the same level with heroin LSD to not be a Class 1, just to let you know. So I think that's a move in the right direction.
I did have one more question, and you may not be the one who can answer it. Is there going to be any mail order prescriptions being filled by these facilities? I know, we do that now with certain drugs, but I'm not sure.
I'm 99% sure that the Massachusetts Cannabis Commission at this point is not allowing any mail order at all. I'm about 99% sure about that. I have a motion on the floor. Council Rossignol.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd make a motion for Council Melville and Council Smazinski to enter into to establish a new template for a host agreement for any and all applicants for medical marijuana. So moved.
You've heard the motion. Any discussion on the motion? Council McGinn.
On the motion, just so as not to put any limits on the resources they can draw on, maybe you could add to the motion that they specifically request the inputs of the health department, the police department, and any other departments that the city solicitor or Councilor Melville sees fit in the process of drafting this document.
So move. Any additional discussion on the motion on the floor? Roll call vote, please.
Sorry, Mr.
Yes, Councilman McGinn.
I think one other comment I think that the city solicitor made, he was also looking for authorization to involve the attorneys for the two applicants, right? And so we want to include that as part of the motion. Is that
so moved? So moved. Included in the motion. Thank you, Councilman McGinn. Roll call vote.
Councilors Gould.
Yes.
Manning Martin.
Yes.
Rossignol.
Yes.
Turco.
Yes.
Melville.
Yes.
Saslar.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.
I had one small piece of business before we, while we have the city solicitor here, I did want to ask a question. that does get asked, and we don't meet that often. The question I have, City Solicitor, is regarding a referendum on the ballot in 2019. Is that something that this body, if so moves, to make a motion to put the referendum regarding the recreational marijuana in the city of Peabody, is that something that this body could do for the November 19th? I assume November 2019 would be the earliest, not 2018. That's my question.
It's conditioned upon the city not taking any action on recreational marijuana through that time period. So, we have the moratorium, and after the moratorium is over, there's the period of time created by the legislature for cities like us that voted against it, against recreational, in which to have a referendum to decide the issue.
So taking that one step further, the moratorium goes through the end of 2018. We do have a vote coming up regarding the zoning amendment. If that zoning passes and recreational marijuana is banned through a zoning ordinance, can we then still put that back on the ballot to the citizens of Peabody where they could take a vote on recreational marijuana in November of 2019?
The bottom line is you can have a zoning ordinance amendment, ban recreational. You can do two things. You can ultimately go back to the populace and have a referendum after the time period by statute. And just so you know, you can ban it, and at any time after you vote to ban it, you can decide you want to take up, an ordinance that allows it and restrict it, and you can allow it. It's just like the billboards. They were in, and then they were prohibited. You could come back and hypothetically allow them again. That's within your power and province.
My only question, I've only been doing this for a few short years. If that ban passes at the end of the month and there's a vote for reconsideration, it's my understanding that that cannot be brought up for 2 years. Is that incorrect? Or where it's a zoning ordinance, you could actually bring it up in 2019, aside from the referendum question?
I believe you can come back and repeal it if you want. Not repeal the ban.
You can repeal the zoning ordinance.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Motion to adjourn? So moved.